Well, I am beyond excited to introduce our guest today, Alok Sama, who is a former senior finance executive whose career has spanned Wall Street, global tech, and now literary circles. I love his second mountain, which we're going to get into. As president and CFO of SoftBank International, Alok helped lead some of the largest deals in tech history, including the $59 billion Sprint T-Mobile merger and the $34 billion acquisition of Arm Holdings. He's also a former senior managing director at Morgan Stanley, where he built capital markets and investment banking practices across Asia. After this incredibly impressive career in global finance, Alok returned to school at the age of 58 and earned an MFA in creative writing from NYU. And when you pick up and read his book, Money Trap, you will realize that he's a very gifted writer and that NYU should be very proud of his graduation. It's a gripping account of ambition, identity, and the personal toll of living inside the tech bubble. Alok really is a citizen of the world, living in New York, London, Delhi, and Dubai, and has some incredible insights on serendipity, storytelling, power of curiosity, music, literature. I'm just super excited to do this. Thank you so much for being willing to be on the podcast today.
Thank you, Craig. That is quite a flattering introduction, but thank you for having me and excited about our discussion.
Absolutely. And it's well deserved. We'll try not to digress into golf because we both share that passion, although it sounds like you score a little better. We also have share a passion for golden retrievers. And sadly, not to start the podcast on a sad note, but I have to say it, on Tuesday, we were on a hike and one of our two golden retrievers passed away. So
I can relate to that. And I talk about that in my book, as you know, that was,
I do know.
My friend, that special golden sea.
Yeah. You didn't write the book for a tear, but you got one at that part for me. So could we start with a little bit? I love the story about your dad. Talk a little bit about who your dad was, your mom and dad, medical background. Talk a little bit about your upbringing, if you would, because I think it's instructive as to why you're so successful.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to chat about it. I mean, I was born in India, and for the first 21 years of my life, it's not an exaggeration to say that I didn't really travel anywhere beyond New Delhi. I might have been to Mumbai, never been on a plane. My father was an academic, and my parents, when they met, my mother was one of his students at a medical college, a research hospital, actually, in New Delhi. And we were in my, kind of very early days in my childhood, we were middle class, which in India, kind of anchored that in the metaphor of saying, in India, that means we had ceiling fans instead of air conditioning, right? We didn't own a car. The only family transportation was a two-wheeler. So it was a happy childhood, I have to say. But kind of relating it to kind of things that make an impact. What I do remember is not so much my own sense of deprivation, but some of what my parents experienced in terms of not being able to give their children everything that they thought that we deserved. And that included, protein, buying any form of meat was expensive, kind of literally thinking in terms of like, okay, being able to, we were not vegetarian. A lot of people in India are, but simply being able to, kind of give us, mutton or chicken a few times a week. I mean, little things like that, which for them were luxuries. And so that's when I grew up. My father was a very successful scientist. He went on to be decorated. I mean, he got the equivalent to what in the UK and the Commonwealth would be a knighthood. And then later on, as a private practitioner, became, by Indian standards anyway, a wealthy man and chaired but a good man in the sense that he was chairman of one of the biggest charity hospitals in the country, and so there was a lot of giving back. And one of the things I do reflect on, and we're happy to dive into this, or I'm happy to dive into this, is I kind of stumbled into the world of finance, which is as different as it gets, as you can imagine. And this whole sense of kind of the pursuit of money juxtaposed with my father's own life and how he lived it is something I struggled with. But that's, I mean, that's a long-winded answer. I'm happy to unpack some of those issues as we chat.
No, I look forward to that. And it seemed like the title of the book is a bit of a foreshadow in terms of that, right? That you get stuck we all get stuck in this path, and we don't get to always reflect on what our core principles are while we're in the path. We bring our best selves, but no, I find that fascinating. And your mom, by the way, was also a doctor as well.
She was, and obviously she was an extraordinary influence. And she had me while she was still a student, and then she had my brother 3 years later, and she had to drop out of medical college, took a long break. But then, to her credit, she went back to medical college, and kind of to her last breath, literally, she was still practicing.
Well, I did note to myself, my parents and your parents have passed away, but we both are members of the fortunate parent club. I was admiring the qualities you described in both of your parents, especially, and we'll get into the kind of the later in the book when you get into their passing, which was relatively close together, at least it seems so. So talk a bit about, you kind of get introduced to a professor at Wharton, like this path that you go on. Talk about how important a mentor can be and how it kind of changed your path in life that led you to Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, sure. So I was, again, it's very difficult to reset the clock in terms of everything that's changed. We're talking about now India in 1984, right? I mean, it was, forget about the technology changes, no internet, etc. But India was a completely closed economy, right? So we had no more than 4 hours of black and white television in the evenings, and kind of what 2 hours of that was programming directed at farmers. This was a socialist economy, kind of inspired by the Soviet Union. And, it was an economy that had stood still for like 30, 40 years, right? Didn't start to open up until well into the 90s. The relevance of that is we were just completely closed to the world. I mean, there were no American movies, kind of edgy American movies, Taxi Driver, Scorsese, that might have given me some insight into the reality of New York. Forget it, right? So none of that. So my only knowledge of America was based on, kind of hand me down on library copies of Time and Life magazine, right? Most of your listeners probably don't even know what Life is, but you know what I'm talking about. I mean, that's literally, I mean, that was the extent of my knowledge of the United States. A lot of my learning about America actually came from music, and very, very early, I became and I still am to the day, a huge music fan. Bob Dylan, still a hero. Bruce Springsteen, Paul Simon, who I rate as, kind of the three greatest American songwriters. I mean, I lived America through them. But coming back directly to your question, my father, I was studying mathematics at the liberal arts college in New Delhi. And this is not pure serendipity, and I'll talk about that because it just plays such a big role in life, more than I think people realize. My father knew someone who he thought was a mathematician, who thought he might be able to guide me. And as it turns out, this gentleman was a mathematician in the broader sense, but he actually taught statistics operations research at the Wharton School, which is still is one of the premier schools, business schools, right up there with Harvard and Stanford. And so I met him, and I was a good student. And he did his homework and kind of suggested that I come to America and I study finance. And what did I know about finance? I mean, I'd never heard of J.P. Morgan or Morgan Stanley. I mean, I think the only names in finance I knew, because they were the only two financial institutions, American institutions, that had a presence, were maybe Citibank and Bank of America. So I'd never heard of JP Morgan, etc. So I came to the Wharton School, 1984, kind of if you remember Wall Street, kind of this is Ronald Reagan's America, the greed is good decade. So Mike Milken at presenting. A lot of people may not remember Milken. He's completely rehabilitated then, but he was one of the pioneers of the junk bond market. And he made an impression, and that was a little bit of my inspiration to get into finance. And we don't get to pick our heroes. He ended up in jail, obviously. So what did I know? But that's how I got into Wharton, and then from there into the world of finance.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. And by the way, speaking of your love of music, your Easter egg lyric references were not lost on me, at least, in the book. I love that. But yeah, no, it sounds like you had quite the culture shock.
It really was. Absolutely was. Yeah, I think that's the right way to describe. Bit of a cliche, but that's exactly the right way to describe it. Yeah.
And what were there hacks that you used? I know you were you were obviously very, very bright, and you had focused on, pretty complex mathematical concepts before you even got to the United States. But what were some of your hacks in terms of making sure that you could connect with people and, feel a part of a social fabric?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, academically, I found it easy. So that bit was straightforward. I was very young when I came to business school, and I found that, kind of the professors went out of their way almost to dumb things down mathematically, analytically, which I found a little bit frustrating. So that bit was fine. But what is a challenge is what you rightly described as culture shock, kind of how does one dress? I've never worn a suit before. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, kind of interviewing at places like a Morgan Stanley, kind of as buttoned down, waspy as it gets. That's the stuff that took a lot of getting used to. And I talk about this in the book. One of the pieces of advice that always stayed with me, which the gentleman, Dr. Shiv Gupta, who's the one who sponsored me to go to the Wharton School, gave me, is watch them, look like them, dress like them, behave like them. And I really kind of internalized that, right? So it was a bit of a caricature, going into a Brooks Brothers and, kind of white button-down shirts and spotted yellow and red ties and pinstripe suits and all of that gig. And, my hair used to be wild down to my shoulders, getting a proper, it's things like that, it was just a major league makeover. And, but the beauty of America is people, I'm pretty scathing about Wall Street and the culture, but the positive side of Wall Street is it's the purest meritocracy out there. So if you're bright and you're willing to work 24/7, they will give you a shot. That's the beauty of America, and that's the beauty of Wall Street. And Morgan Stanley did that for me wonderfully, right? And obviously I worked, but they gave me great opportunities in the early days, starting out in New York. But then, it was literally a case of join Morgan Stanley, see the world. I mean, I traveled out to Japan, to Europe, I went to Hong Kong. I got to set up Morgan Stanley's business in India. Eventually ended up in London, where I led our communications practice. So it was just a fantastic learning experience.
So that's exactly what I want to get to, which is you've worked with some of the most impressive people in corporate finance history, and at least in our history, right? Our lifetime. What do you think, if you were to go back and pick a few things that you learned along the way, whether it be at Morgan Stanley or in other areas, that allowed you to sit next to Masayoshi Son, for example, at SoftBank, and have him listen to you, and, as you say, keep up and occasionally be a step ahead of the top advisors in the world? What was that secret sauce? What were a couple of the building blocks that you acquired along the way? Obviously you came with a lot, but but what were things you learned?
Yeah, I think it's what Wall Street taught me. And by the way, I have a son who's 32, and I had this conversation with him when he graduated from college, and he did end up being an analyst on the fringe of Wall Street. But my I advocate those roles because it's work ethic more than anything else. Sometimes they push you too far, but when you're working, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, working weekends, I think these days I see among millennials a sense of entitlement. I would never sell short. You have to make compromises. You absolutely have to make compromises. And you got to realize that in the early days, when you're building wealth, when you're establishing yourself, there is no substitute for putting in the hours. A really rigorous, disciplined way of thinking is the other skill, and I worry about that these days because there's so many shortcuts. What with AI, etc. Right? I mean, I cut my teeth on Wall Street when it sounds unbelievable, but we did not have spreadsheets. We didn't have Microsoft Excel. We had Lotus 123, which you may not remember, that came before Microsoft Excel. But when I started out, there was none of that, right? So, and we're in an era now where you could take a lot of shortcuts. You go straight to any of the LLMs and you could get answers straight off the bat. I actually think that's really dangerous. I mean, I think this is like, you really need to get in the weeds, have a command of the details, um, the rigor of actually digging deep into the tax code, understanding how it works. Those are the things, by the way, that even working with Son made an impression on him. And I really do wonder about all the shortcuts that we have at our disposal today and what that means for how people learn.
Yeah. I mean, you've obviously got a wealth of material out there, and I was preparing, and I have a 30-year-old son who's fabulous. He's a performance psychologist, and he really understands AI. And he said, Dad, why don't you just put, the book and the podcasts into ChatGPT and have it spit out your outline? And I said, because you don't understand what the podcast is about. If that, like, I don't understand who the person is.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand the essence of the person. You have to nuance. And, I feel like I am a little worried that, even when we get the data lakes right on AI, which it would be in preparing for something like this to put all of your stuff in there, you don't really get a sense of how to connect with somebody. You don't get a sense for really what they care about. And so, I remember a quick story. I was, kind of in your world, but in law, and, working my tail off to get the best grades, to get internships. And I remember I was deciding between a few law firms in Texas, and I asked my mentor at this Dallas law firm, I said, how many hours do we, how many hours should we be working, or what's the minimum hours or something like that? So I felt probably pretty entitled myself. And he said, I think you're looking at it all wrong. He said, think of what you're doing when you're working as putting money in the bank that's going to compound interest. Yeah. The experiences that you get by working extra hard early in your career, you don't know where they're going to pay off, but they're going to pay off. And I remember thinking about that completely differently. Yeah. So, one of the things that comes through your book is a lot of philosophy. You talk a few times about Paris Hilton's follow your passion or your talent, since we're on the path to success, talk a bit about why following your passion or talent may not be the end of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I say this tongue in cheek, but I really mean it. I mean, I think follow your passion is terrible advice, because if someone had told me that at age 20, I kind of say this in the book, I would have been sitting on a beach in Goa smoking weed, listening to Steely Dan. Do you know what I mean? I mean, and I probably would have been very good at that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So that's not a very good idea. I think following what you're good at is probably better advice. But actually, I'm going to say something that's a little bit contradictory, kind of in light of what we talked about, which is some of the comments about money and the pursuit of wealth. I actually think that it's really, really important to get out there and make money and try and become financially independent as soon as you can, because that's the point at which you could legitimately think in terms of indulging your passions, if not completely pursuing them, right? So I love reading. I still do. I really enjoyed writing, but it was like a closet passion. But at age 58, I could finally indulge that. I could have, and I probably should have done that a lot sooner. But I do think it's kind of important to get out there and and to make money. And what I mean by the money crap is the danger is you get caught up in it, and it just becomes really, really difficult to walk away. And I think the best advice I can offer is whatever career you're in, there will be breakpoints, and that could be a function of personal events, death in your family, illness, you get laid off, a major upheaval like a war or the financial crisis. That's when you kind of step back and reevaluate and think in terms of, okay, is it time to break free, right? I mean, so there's kind of up the notion of, kind of opportunities in every crisis is the best way to I think to think about that, because when you're flying and you're making millions every year, it's like it's just, and nobody leaves that. It's just kind of, it's pointless even talking about that. People set themselves objectives. I make 10 million, I'm going to retire, and nobody does that. I haven't seen anyone do that.
Yeah. I just turned 60, and reading the book was also quite therapeutic for me to think about your path. So for those people who don't know SoftBank or Masayoshi Son, I mean, it's hard to not know SoftBank or really Masayoshi Son, but frame a bit who he is, obviously Korean, but lived in Japan. Talk a little bit about, what made him tick. And then we'll get into what you're talking about in the money trap a little bit, because you were exposed to a measure of wealth that very few people see. So,
yeah, sure. So, I mean, the headline first, just to put him in kind of today's context, Masa is the biggest investor in OpenAI, right? I mean, he's committed to 30 billion in OpenAI, and he's Sam Altman's go-to person when it comes to financial backing. His profile has risen quite dramatically over the last 6 months. Not that he was low profile before, but at the White House at Mar-a-Lago with President Trump talking about this $500 billion Project Stargate, which is building out AI infrastructure in the United States. So that's Masayoshi Son today. Now, his origins, SoftBank is not a bank. A lot of people, when I say I work for SoftBank or I talk about SoftBank, it's not a bank at all. Where the name comes from is it's a bank for software. So SoftBank's origins were as a distributor for Microsoft software in Japan. So Masa was Korean, and for those of you not familiar with what that means, I mean, kind of that's in Japan, even today, that's worse than being black in, kind of in the kind of pre-Civil War South. It was terrible. It really, really was terrible. You had no real rights to citizenship. You couldn't get a normal job. You were subhuman. And that's what his father grew up with. He himself was bullied in school, a lot of adversity, but he fought all that. Brilliant man, genius even, and he made a mark for himself. Started off as a distributor for software, and then where he really made a splash was in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. He was very early in jumping on the internet bandwagon. And, the Yahoo name has vanished, but, back through the heyday of the internet, well, not the heyday, I should say, the early days of the internet, Yahoo was everyone's portal to the internet, as big as Google. And Masa was in very early He's the biggest investor in Google by far. And by the year 2000, he briefly surpassed Bill Gates to become the richest man in the world, owned 8% of all internet stocks. And this is where the drama, the enigma of Masayoshi Son kicks in. He didn't sell out in time. And after being the richest person in the world, he featured in the Guinness Book of World Records as having lost the most money ever, right? Just, kind of down to, as I joke with him when I met him, Masa-san, down to your last billion, right? Uh,
Yeah.
so that's his early history. And then he came back, he had a marvelous bet on smartphones, bought a phone company on the strength of Steve Jobs giving him a handshake and saying, I'll give you an exclusive for Japan, for the iPhone, that is. He bought into Alibaba, Chinese e-commerce company, and when he eventually sold out of that, his realized profit on that was $72 billion. So turning 40 million into 73 billion. Quite certain that is and probably will remain the best venture capital investment in history. And then, while I was there, one of the companies I helped him buy, Arm Holdings, which is not a company most of your listeners will be familiar with, but if you own a smartphone, and I'm sure everyone does, 99% of smartphones will have a minimum of 5 ARM designed, ARM architecture chips in them. And so it's a valuable company. We bought it for 34 billion, and now it's being repositioned as a designer of chips that are at the edge of the network, intelligent chips, and the company is worth close to 150 billion now. So, again, SoftBank owns 90% of that company. And then where Masa made another dent on the universe, and I was there, and I talk about this in my book, quite dramatic. He raised the largest pool of private capital ever for the technology business, the $100 billion Vision Fund. And that was not very successful. There was a successive Vision Fund too. And Son, if you can believe, crashed and burned the same way he did in 2021. People wrote himself off. He wrote himself off. He stopped doing earnings calls. He said, I'm giving up. And then he's back. And, it's Arm was a huge success story. And to hear him talk now, he's riding as high as ever. He believes that he's on the world for a reason, which is to ride this next industrial revolution, which is artificial intelligence.
Thank you. That was such a good, crisp summary. I mean, obviously you lived it, so but such a good, crisp summary for those who aren't aware. And the stories are so much more interesting than just the cliff notes. So.
By the way, I should mention the other the other brush with people's, Americans in particular, everyday lives was SoftBank owned Sprint, which we merged with T-Mobile, and SoftBank is the biggest shareholder in T-Mobile. So, it was he had a pretty strong view back in 2015 that Americans were getting a really raw deal in terms of wireless broadband infrastructure relative to Japan, and he wanted to fix that. So he's a big believer, I should say, and that's a great example of technology as a way to improve people's lives. It sounds idealistic, but that's just the way the man is. I mean, he's not in it to make money. He is a real believer in using technology to improve people's lives.
Yeah, it's a grand vision which allows him to make these massive bets and that are directionally correct. I mean, even you talk a little bit about some of his failures, like WeWork, which was a notable, I guess you could call it a failure. You would call it a failure, but that it was directionally correct, or Uber directionally correct. The concept that we're going to go to driverless cars, and so I think start first with the free coffee to everyone story and how that connects to somebody who has this gumption or guts to make the big bets that Masa-san makes.
Yeah, the free coffee for all. When Son first told me the story, I thought it was exactly that, a story. But then I heard it from his father, and I believe it. So his father actually owned a coffee shop, and Son was he was age 10 at the time, and he had this coffee shop. They thought they had the best coffee in Tokyo, but nobody would come. And Masa's idea was, okay, we're going to do a promotion, free coffee for all. So at the street corner outside, posted signs, free coffee. And so people came in and they came in to sample the free coffee. They loved it. And because Japanese are incredibly polite people, they don't like getting stuff for free. There's very little by way of theft, petty theft in Japan. They would end up buying an expensive pastry, right? And this idea of a freemium model, we give something free and people come in, and when they're in your store, you sell them something that you can actually make money on. And then obviously people came in, they loved the coffee, and very soon they were coming in for coffee. So it's kind of a cute little story, but it has brilliant applicability for technology businesses, particularly when you're talking about platform businesses with network effects. Now, that's a couple of buzzwords in there. By network effects, I mean the idea of a business or a platform. A platform is you don't actually own a store. You own a virtual platform, a website that connects, in the case of Uber, for example, that connects drivers and people who are looking for a ride, right? And it has network effects in as much as the more people get on the website, the more drivers get on the website, the more valuable it becomes to both drivers and to customers, right? More drivers means as a customer, I got more choice, and it's a virtuous cycle. And from a driver perspective, if there's going to be a lot of people on the website, I want to get on, and it's so it goes. It's a wonderful little flywheel. And again, there's an element of, okay, I've got customers, and this is a part of why Uber's been successful. I got customers, they're taking a ride, I got them on my platform, I got them on my credit card. What more can I do with them? Well, that's how Uber Eats was born, right? So you start delivering food, you start delivering stuff. So there's a lot of lessons in that, kind of how a 10-year-old entrepreneur, very young entrepreneur, is kind of seeded with ideas like this. And when he saw these technology platform business models, he made that connection. He immediately, intuitively understood. And just was a raging advocate of backing entrepreneurs and telling them, I'll back you, give it away for free. Alibaba, he did that in China, right? You're a platform, you're connecting merchants to customers. Don't charge any fees. Don't charge any fees until you get to 80% market share. Once you've got that platform, people are hooked. That's when you start driving up margins.
Yeah. So to timestamp this, Masa-san's in the news today for his commitment to invest $2 billion of capital into
Intel. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was yesterday's headline. Yeah.
Right. And so the question, I mean, there's an example in the, exactly as we're filming this of, and by the way, SoftBank stock took a huge hit, as it frequently does in these investments, because people can't see the vision for it. Without sharing anything confidential, what is his vision? Give that as an example of what he sees there. Is it to curry favor with the current U.S. administration, so he has more openings in other areas? Where's that play?
Yeah, well, first of all, just to be clear, I'm 6 years out of SoftBank, so I don't have any confidential information. So anything I say here, by the way, is purely speculative. So I don't think the stock went down because of the Intel deal. I think the stock went down because all technology stocks. First of all, the stock has had a remarkable run this year. I think it's up 70-80% this year, so it was due for a correction. It went down, I think, because Sam Altman made comments, sort of ironic, about how all of these private internet businesses are overvalued, and I think there was a correction all around. Nvidia stock took a hit, so there's a lot of that going on. In terms of insights about what Son has in mind, again, what I'm saying is purely speculative. But I suspect part of what he has in mind is he owns ARM. He's made a couple of investments, Graphco, which is a UK business, another business, and at the back of his mind, maybe, and once again, this is purely speculative, I have no inside information, he may well be thinking in terms of creating a competitor to NVIDIA, because NVIDIA has a near monopoly on chips that go into data centers. the GPUs, graphics processing units, general purpose GPUs. And he may well think that having a company like Intel is a partner. Remember, he's for 2 billion. I mean, makes him a small minority investor. He's really not in a position to influence outcome. But that alliance, in terms of setting him up to eventually start to design and manufacture chips that compete with NVIDIA, they may be a part of that, and part of it is let's face it. I mean, there's a point you made about currying favor, aligning yourself with the Trump administration. I mean, I think this is a broader debate about the nature of capitalism in the United States today, but that stuff is important, particularly if you're a foreigner with big ambitions in the United States.
Right, because you point out in the book something that we do a lot as a firm, the regulations that kind of are protectionist to prevent non-American investors into companies in the United States, the CFIUS laws, among others. Yeah, that's fascinating. So just to wrap up a bit on such a big topic, AI, we could talk about this for hours, obviously. But as you say in Money Trap, the internet comes online and people are kind of like, yeah, this seems important. It seems transformational, but we're not quite sure why yet. And people like you and Masayoshi Son kind of can think ahead a bit, and understand where it's going. AI, we're starting to see the applications of AI in medicine and some other areas, obviously, including military, things like that. But if you were thinking ahead and thinking the metaphor to Internet of Things, or comparing it to that as a concept for the internet, where do you see AI in 10 years? Where is it going to transform our world?
I think across the board, every company, literally every activity is going to be influenced by AI. It's just one of a kind, revolutionary productivity tool. I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm using it now as for feedback on writing. I mean, and I tell you, ChatGPT 5, this version, giant strides from ChatGPT 4. I mean, I feed in like a chapter that I've written, and it'll immediately give me feedback. The writing is clumsy, so it's not like you can lift out packages, but it'll immediately tell me the same way one of my professors might have. It literally is that good. Is that your pacing's a little bit off, or there's too much exposition here, you might consider trimming that down. It really is that good, and it's getting better and better, right? So, when it comes to businesses, low-hanging fruit is all repetitive tasks, right? Including stuff that, I mean, if you've got a legal background, paralegals, for example, toast. In the investment banking world, analyst, David Solomon's on record is saying that kind of 95% of what goes into preparing an S1 prospectus, which is what you do when you file for an IPO in the United States, for example, can be done by AI in 5 minutes, right? So it is tremendously disruptive. Coding, right? I mean, the Anthropic was supposed to be the best. I'm told ChatGPT 5 is every bit as good. So it is. It truly is transformational. I still have a senior advisor role at Warburg Pincus, one of the biggest growth investors globally, and we're seeing that, or they're seeing that across their portfolio. Right. I mean, whether it's customer service, and it's not just customer service, like eliminating jobs. It is AI agents doing better jobs, doing better at humans can, because the recall is tremendous, right? An AI agent will never forget a customer because the data is instantaneously available, accessible. It will know if you call into a car dealership what your history is. If you're a veteran and they've got a special deal for veterans, as a productivity tool, it's awesome. So margin expansions across the board. One of the reasons I'm bullish on the stock market, it's going beyond tech stocks, is because of the productivity improvements and the margin expansion potential for AI. Now, where it also affects us very tangibly, and Jensen Huang talked about this at the beginning of the year, is physical AI and the the earliest manifestation of that, the robots, they're coming, they're finally coming, intelligent robots that actually do stuff for you, like including doing your laundry or wash dishes, but autonomous cars. I mean, I tell you, one of my aha moments in the world of technology, as big as holding an iPhone in my first hand, is when I took my first Waymo ride in San Francisco. Never felt safer in a car, right? So that's AI. That's AI at work. It's physical AI and it's here.
Yeah. And I have a Tesla, and frankly, just so I could see what it was, I got the full self-driving.
Good for you.
And,
it's cool, isn't it? I mean, I don't have it, but I've driven it. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And they ask for, right now I'm in Park City, Utah, so we're in the mountains, and there was a deer that was kind of on the side of the road. So I took over because I didn't want the deer to just jump out. And, it said, "Why did you disengage self-driving?" And so they get the data back from the user. So it's even more nuanced.
Of course it is. It's learning. It's learning. Machine learning. That's what they call that.
It's it. Yeah, no, it is amazing. And you started the podcast with your reflection on where we have to be vigilant, which is it gives you the answer, and people can't go through the process of getting to the answer. And that's where a lot of our learning takes place. So I'm sure you've given this advice, but if you were talking to our kids about career paths that will not be compromised by AI, what would you have folks focus on?
Plumbing.
A robot can do that,
I mean, anything physical. I mean, look, it is. I'm being facetious, mainly because I honestly don't know. It's that kind of environment, right? So let's wait and see. I mean, all I can tell you is people felt pretty darn insecure when it came to electricity, for example, and in terms of what it was going to eliminate, etc. Or cars, right? I mean, so it's the same thing with every major technological breakthrough, the sense of insecurity. And I'm a huge believer in a liberal arts education, right? So, 5 years, 10 years ago, it was really cool to say, you got to learn how to code. Well, guess what? Coding is completely vulnerable. It's useless. A liberal arts education, the ability to think critically, it's never going to go out of fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. The nuancing of the human emotion, psychology, things like that. It seems like I am pleased my oldest picked performance psychology, because that seems still, I know you can still ask advice of ChatGPT, but it's not quite the same as really getting to know somebody in a real way, seeing their body language. Okay. I'm going to get into a few softer issues. There's so much I'd want to ask you, but I am mindful of your time. One thing you may not get asked this a lot, but Maya is brought up a few times in the book at some really critical moments. Maya's, of course, your wife of 40 plus years. It seems like a really cool partnership. As somebody who's been married 33 years, talk about, how that marriage evolved as a partnership over time. I mean, you were flying everywhere. I think I travel a lot, and I was like, oh my God, this is just making me tired thinking of you being in Tokyo and then back to London and back to Delhi. And, talk a bit about why that partnership's so important, and your relationship with your wife.
So, well, first of all, it's not 40 plus. I'm old, but I'm not that old. So it'll be 40 next year.
Okay. 40 next year. Okay. Almost
close
40,
enough. Close enough.
Right.
No, but I do talk about that. And I think it's really, really important, because that partnership, that support, and it's not just the support. I mean, I talk about how when I got my first bonus, I still remember the number. How can I forget it? $190,000. I bought her a bracelet from Bulgari, right? Kind of Italian designer jewelry. She never wore it, right? And that's kind of kept me grounded all the way through. The idea that, look, kind of it's this is not where our happiness is coming from, right? not that, kind of, I don't want to knock being rich. Trust me, that would be
Yeah.
supremely hypocritical for me to do. So I think it's cool to be rich, to have money. And I have to say, I've been shamelessly indulgent. I've owned 6 911 Porsches in a row. So I'm not, kind of, I've enjoyed having money, and I would I would recommend it to everyone who's in a position to make some, as long as the compromises are bearable. But she kept me grounded. I think that's really, really important. And she also had the willingness, for which I am eternally grateful, to make compromises. She is, and I say this genuinely, she's brighter than I am. Kind of in the equivalent of, kind of the 12th grade national exams. She was ranked among the top 10 in the country. She could have gone to Yale. She could have gone to Wharton School, turned all of that down, and got a job instead, a very low paying job, working at the New York Philharmonic in audience development. So she's been very close to the arts world. And I'm so happy. My daughter, for example, has picked up on that. My daughter works in the world of contemporary art in New York. My son is in the talent management business. So, kind of they've picked up, and they all have both of them have terrific values. And I think that is in no small measure thanks to the effort that she's put in. So it's been a fantastic partnership. And I just cannot emphasize enough how important those partnerships, those friendships, even if it's not a spouse, those friendships can be over time. People who will be your mirror and kind of tell you that, look, I mean, you're not doing this right, or you're getting carried away, or kind of the real time feedback. It's absolutely priceless.
Yeah. How is there a tip for how you keep when you were keeping that ridiculously fast paced schedule, how you communicated with Maya to keep her in the know, if you will, to be that trusted advisor, to be that checkpoint? What would be a tip somebody could pick up on?
I think a discipline of, it's easy. We could always practice it, but in this day and age with ubiquitous broadband connectivity, I think a daily video call wherever you are in the world actually is a very healthy discipline. I think something like that, I think from a couple's perspective is essential.
Yeah, the video call's a nice hack, if you will, I think, to stay connected to somebody, give them real time. I mean, you've just observed so many things in your life, and I find, I really don't want to get into all of them because people should read the book, but there's so many people that you've been exposed to. I always like to say, a good lawyer helps a client instruct their instincts. They come at it from a different perspective. And so a conversation where you benefit from that back and forth instructs the instincts on a deal. Any reflections on, and whether you want to get into specific people or not, your call. I don't even need that. But as you met all these people through history, some of whom famously failed and some of whom were fabulously successful, some of whom were successful but not great people, any observations that you made of things to look for in making judgments about people?
I think when it comes to, from an investor perspective, when it comes to backing people, banking entrepreneurs, I think having dealt with failure is a great credential. In fact, I think it's a phenomenal credential in a CEO too. I think it teaches you humility, kind of the sense that you're not infallible. It teaches you adaptability, that you're just going to have to roll with the punches. Kind of the when you get a business going, it's almost a given that your original business plan, to the degree you succeed at all, your original business plan is not going to be the one that flies, right? So I think dealing with, I mean, it's like a cliche of failure kind of being a stepping stone to success. I think that's the one insight that I really would pass on. And Son San's a great example. I mean, the man has crashed and burned a few times, and you will see him, you will hear him talk about with a lot of humility and awareness of his blind spots, right? An acknowledgement that he has blind spots. And I think that is really, really important.
Yeah. And is there a process you guys would go through post a setback where you examined the setback and tried to create enduring lessons from the setback, or was it just more instinctive?
It is instinctive, but let me tell you, interesting anecdote since you brought that up. There is a Finnish gaming company that we backed. It was called Supercell. Their biggest
Oh, yeah.
claims were you may be familiar with Clash of Clans. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Clash of Clans was huge, right? So they had every time a team came up with a game and the game failed. And when I say failed, I mean it was shut down by the management. They had a celebration. They served champagne, right? And the whole idea was that we want to encourage people to take risks. And we celebrate the fact that you spent 6 months. I mean, it's kind of comical and it's even a little bit cheesy because you didn't really have anything to show for it. But this is kind of, kind of your son, who's the psychologist, will tell you this. I mean, kind of humans crave acknowledgement, approbation, acknowledgement more than anything else. So just the fact that everyone noticed that you'd made the effort, that you'd had a disappointment, I think that people do institutionalize that. Having said that, at least from my perspective, it's more kind of you look at the facts and you look at the stories and you calibrate accordingly.
Yeah, it's we steal on the team I manage at the firm. We steal Google's expression "fail well."
Yeah, well said. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, and I know you're not a huge fan of the how-to books, but there's one book I always go back to, Carol Dweck's Mindset, to make sure that when you get negative feedback or something bad happens to you, that you look at it from a growth perspective, that it's a gift as opposed to something annoying. Somebody's not seeing something.
I've lived through that. I mean, back in my days at Morgan Stanley, we had this notion of 360-degree feedback. And I tell you what I learned the most from is from the anonymous upward evaluations, because both those tended to be the most candid. And you got to learn from that. And I found it so valuable in terms of what it did for personal growth.
Yep. Okay. I loved my favorite part of the book. I'm sure it wasn't your favorite to write, was about the passing of your parents.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was you coming to grips with, your second mountain, that yes, you've accomplished at the highest levels in corporate finance, but the realization that we all are heading to the same place, no matter how much fun we have in this life. And talk a bit about your transformation from, being on the largest private planes in the world and eating at the finest restaurants and meeting the most important people, to going back and sitting next to a 25-year-old master's student at NYU and learning creative writing. Like that transformation that you made. It's quite a stark one, but I think it was really beautiful. Talk about what went into it.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, and the two aren't quite as directly related as perhaps your summary made it sound. But with respect to, and you're absolutely right, it was the toughest section to write because the book is a memoir, and it's something I felt it had to do. It was a lot of things that were kind of within me, which I think I talked about towards the beginning of this podcast, which is, my father giving me the hug and telling me the last words he spoke to me was literally how proud he was. And then he never spoke again. I don't think he actually spoke again to anyone after that because he just went into a semi-comatose state. And I really wondered, okay, what have I done to make him proud? And you kind of go back in that, and it goes back, and actually there's a callback to another moment in the book where one of the bizarre things that goes down in the book, which you haven't talked about, is this smear campaign, and someone tries to bring me down, and this kind of dossier someone had prepared that again talked about my career and described it in terms of doing big deals and making money. And that sort of wonderment, that one comment, kind of a father giving you a hug, a father who has had a life of service for humanity, pursuit of science, pursuit of knowledge, telling me he's proud, and you're kind of wondering, what have I done that I'm proud of? And you step back and you say, well, I've made money and I've done deals. And yeah, okay. I mean, I think I've brought up my children well, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of a little bit of what you're expected to do, which is, I think I have been blessed with talent that is with a mind, with health, which I'm grateful for, that is beyond average. And what have I done with that to make the world a better place? That's wonder. Maybe that's the philosophical element that really, really came home. And related to that was kind of asking myself, which was by any standards unusually honest, is a lot of self-awareness in terms of how good a son I'd been. I talked about how, despite my uncle, that's my mother's brother, telling me how much she loved getting calls for me, I really didn't call her as often as I should have. And very often, you're right, I'm not big on how-to books or books that have lessons or takeaways. And I have a lot of young people kind of asking me, what are the key takeaways from my book? And instead of telling them about finance or careers, I kind of distill it down to, if there's one thing you want to take away, buddy, just like, call your mother more often. So there's a lot of that. And I'd like to think there's some depth to those observations that kind of comes from lived experience. That's not something I will ever do. And then the other bit was, it's different, which is you talked about NYU. It's related in as much as, okay, an awareness of mortality, that when I'm on my deathbed, I'm not going to be thinking about, I really should have worked an extra few months and made that extra million. I know that's not going to happen, but I'm going to be sitting there thinking, okay, I've always wanted to write. People have told me I'm good. I never really found out how good I could have been. I never really scratched that itch. And it's already very late, but it's not too late, right? And that's kind of what led me to NYU, and I'm so glad I did that. I mean, I was in class with a group of 20 somethings. The typical profile, the demographic was late 20s, female, left wing, right? I mean, even communist. So it was just a phenomenal experience. I mean, I was younger than all of my professors. I asked, they were all, kind of the oldest would have been in their early 50s. So it was quite an experience.
It's, it's such a, thank goodness you did it, because, you've got a gift. You're just, for a memoir, as you describe it, it's just an incredibly well written, creative, you're a great storyteller. I did read recently a book by Sahil Bloom, who's an interesting comment. I don't know if you know Sahil Bloom, but he's a pretty young guy. He's like in his late 30s. His mother was Indian and his father is a Jewish professor, and they met in New York when his mother left India, kind of over her parents' protests. Anyway, so he went into Silicon Valley and he worked his ass off and did all that stuff. And he would interview people, how are you successful? Maybe he interviewed you at one point, and that, he would get advice, work hard, do this, do that. And then one person said, how old are your parents? And he said, well, they're 60. And he said, how often do you see them? Well, I'm in Silicon Valley. They're in New York. We see them like once a year over Christmas. And he said, so you'll see your parents 20 more times before they die if you look at.
I remember that. I haven't read the book, but I do remember that. It's very poignant, isn't it? Yeah.
And he just completely changed what he was focused on. And good for him. I mean, I think we all have different mountains we climb. To pick up on David Brooks's book, Second Mountain, we all climb those. But I think very, very pleased that you did that. Anything, you've got such a wide array of books that from authors I admire as well. You mentioned, the Russian great writers. Is there a capstone book or two that if somebody were listening to this and they said, I really admire Alok, what would be a book or two that they would read? To, it doesn't have to be Yeah.
I'm not going to distill it down to a book or two, but I'll make a general point, which I feel very, very strongly about. I posted this on social media, and I'm a stuck record on this. I think it's shocking that people don't read more fiction, and I think men in particular are at fault here for reasons that I don't completely understand. I think overwhelmingly women read fiction, men gravitate towards nonfiction. And I think in general, most nonfiction books can be distilled into a podcast or a blog post. And I
Yeah.
won't name names, but there are a lot of culprits out there, people who kind of milk their reputations and write 600-700 page books. I would steer clear of those. I'm a huge believer in reading the classics. I think that, look, I mean, even when it comes to technology, you go back and, you want to understand machine learning, go back and read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? in terms of machine learning and how that goes wrong. And, that's a book that was written by a 20-something female over 100 years ago. So I think fiction is absolutely wonderful. I think the Russian greats are the kind of the patron saints of when it comes to philosophy. I'm a huge fan of Chekhov, huge fan of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. But what I really favor in terms of books I enjoy is I love the prose stylists. So people like Nabokov, John Updike, Martin Amis. I mean, those are the writers. Zadie Smith, more contemporary.
Yeah.
Those are some of my writing heroes, people who are just plain fun to read and whose books, when you read them, you enjoy. I think the as a writer, I really think it's my duty if I welcome people inside my head, for 10, 20 years, at a minimum, I need to leave them entertained. And if they pick up something, if they learn something, that's a bonus. So I'm a big fan of entertaining prose stylists. So those are the kind of books I favor. There are other books, I mean, kind of, I give you one that's a little bit off the wall. It's not entertaining. It's not light reading, but one of my favorite books of all time, a tribute to intellectual curiosity. It's The Rings of Saturn by a German writer called Winfried Siebold, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful book. It is. If I tell you what it's about, it's going to seem horribly boring, but you
Yeah.
have to read the book to see how he makes. Kind of no story, nothing comes alive. It's a writer who is going for a walk in a desolate part of England and the northeast coast of England, and he sees things and he has observations, and every observation kind of triggers off some amazing insights into kind of the history of civilization. It's quite remarkable. So I like those kind of books that entertain me, books that make me think, and frequently those books are fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And you do mention in something I read, when you like science fiction in terms of being instructive for what we're going to see in the future, which, yeah.
Yeah, no, I do like science fiction too, but believe me, I mean, I enjoy Scott Fitzgerald or Jane Austen as much as more than I do any
Yeah.
science fiction writers I've ever read, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for taking the time today. One of the things I don't love about how we use this technology is that I don't get to meet you in person in this time, but I hope that changes. And I know that people who are listening to this will get a glimpse, that they can get a more detailed look into the specifics of what you experienced during your time at SoftBank and Morgan Stanley. And, but more importantly, I hope they got a glimpse for who you are as a person, because you're someone worthy of admiration. And, I look forward to, reading more of what you produce, because, I do think you're a very gifted writer.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.